I'm Alison Yager from Florida Health Justice Project, and just to share for the recording tonight, we're going to be talking about the public health emergency and extended Medicaid and what Miami-Dade residents need to know. So what to do now? There are a few things that you should be doing if you are currently receiving Medicaid in order to make sure that GCF has your most current information, especially your current address, because they are going to start sending out these letters and you want to know when you get one. You do not want that letter going to an old address, because if GCF is making a decision about your case, you want to know what it is that they're deciding. So if you've moved, and even if you don't remember whether, when the last time you moved was and whether you updated your address or not since then, it's a good idea to just go on to the GCF website and update your address, or make sure that the address that they have on file for you is correct. And on the GCF website now, they have this cute little virtual assistant that's kind of like bouncing around in the bottom right corner, and it says, "How can I help you?" And I've actually watched all the way through the process with that virtual assistant to do an address update, and it works very well. So that's a great and easy way to get right into the system and update your address. Also, update any other information. You do want GCF to know the most accurate and up-to-date information about your income levels, about who's in your household. They need to have correct information. So update that now, while, before their systems are flooded with a million people all trying to do that at the same exact time. And if you don't already have an online account with DCF, then you should open an online account. That's called an access account. It's very easy to do. Again, you can do it on their website. You should open that because that's an easy way to communicate with them through, it's not like you're getting personal emails, and it's not like you can send personal emails, but to make sure that the information they have in the system about you is correct, and that you can get notices. So, so this is a snapshot of a letter that GCF has already sent out to hundreds of thousands of Florida residents. And the part in red says, "We have reviewed your Medicaid eligibility and determined you are no longer eligible for Medicaid coverage. To make sure you have Medicaid coverage during the COVID-19 pandemic health emergency, we will keep your Medicaid coverage open until the end of the month the federal government determines the emergency is over." So I can barely read that without getting tongue-tied. So that is a very confusing letter. Even the first two sentences are very confusing. But they're sending this letter out to folks for whom they've gotten updates about those people's income or change in family household composition. And GCF thinks, okay, you're not, once the public health emergency ends, you're not going to be eligible anymore. So we're giving you a little heads up now. So if you've gotten that letter, and if you think it's wrong, please, you can reach out to us at Florida Health Justice Project. And if you lose my contact information, you can reach out to Catalyst Miami, and they know how to connect you to me. But if you got one of those letters and you'd like to review the determination with someone to make sure that it's correct, please, don't throw it away. Don't ignore it. We know we never, ever, ever ignore mail that we get from DCF as much as we want to. It's kind of like never, ever ignoring letters from the IRS. As much as we don't want to open those envelopes, we know we need to. But feel free to reach out and make sure that A, you understand what the letter means, and B, that the letter is correct. So let's go to the next slide. what to do later if you do get a notice that your coverage has been discontinued. And let me just say, you know, a lot of people don't even know that they have Medicaid coverage because they know that they're with Molina or Sunshine, or, you know, whichever one of the healthcare plans, and don't realize that that's actually a plan that's contracting with the state to provide Medicaid benefits. So if you know that you have a health insurance program, but you're not sure, is it Medicaid or not? You should do a little investigation to figure out what coverage do I have, and am I potentially impacted by all the stuff she's talking about tonight? So if you do get a letter saying you're discontinued, here's a handful of things you can do. One is, if you have a caseworker at any organization that you're a part of, meet with that caseworker to help you ensure that that termination was correct. Have them go through that chart with you. If your caseworker doesn't know how to go through that chart, then come to Florida Health Justice Project or Catalyst Miami, and be sure that you're connecting with someone who understands the eligibility categories. And remember, like that example we gave of Zoe, where maybe she's no longer eligible just strictly as a low-income parent, but maybe now she's pregnant, and then she's eligible in a whole different category, which has different income guidelines. So be sure that you're also thinking about, well, I'm not in the same category I was, but now I have eligibility in a whole new way. So if the termination was wrong, you can appeal it, and we can help with that. If the termination was correct, then like we said before, there's a few different places you should be thinking about for new kinds of coverage. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to be uncovered. It means you could go to the ACA marketplace, and there are navigators, and I believe Catalyst Miami is going to talk about that, navigators who can help you with getting a marketplace plan. There are also Healthy Kids program, the Healthy Kids program, also known as KidCare. And you can meet with an enroller who can help you get your kids into the Healthy Kids program potentially. And the eligibility guidelines for that are much more generous than they are for Medicaid. And at Florida Health Justice Project, that is something that we do. So if you know you want to get your kids into the Healthy Kids program, if they're no longer eligible for Medicaid, you can reach out to us about that. And if you're in the coverage gap, meaning you can't get Medicaid anymore, but you also can't get an ACA marketplace subsidy, and you can't access coverage through the marketplace otherwise, then that's when you go and think about that Jackson Care card. If you want to contact us, this is I'm Alison, the second email, and my colleague Miriam is also an attorney who specializes in these issues. So those are our email addresses. And we have a lot of information on our website. So if you go to floridahealthjustice.org/public-health-emergency, you can find us, or even if you just Google Florida Health Justice Public Health Emergency, you will get to that page.
Just some other options that are available to you all. KidCare at Catalyst Miami is the Children's Health Insurance Program, which covers children from birth up until the age of 18. And it also consists of immunizations, health checkups, vision screenings, and more. So at Catalyst Miami, we have navigators that will assist with KidCare. We also have Open Enrollment, which will begin November 1st through January 15th. Catalyst will have certified application counselors that will be assisting with applications through the federal facilitated marketplace to help you determine the best quality health plan for you. For further information, please schedule an appointment with Catalyst Miami on catalystmiami.org to learn /client to learn more information about the services that we offer.
So a little bit of background about Florida's Medicaid program. I imagine that if you're here tonight, you already know what Medicaid is, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, what is Medicaid? Medicaid is a public health insurance program. It's for low-income individuals, low-wealth individuals. In Florida, Medicaid insurance generally covers children, low-income parents, people with disabilities, seniors over the age of 65, and pregnant people. And at the moment, about 5 million people, close to 5 million Floridians have health coverage through Medicaid. So this is a huge program. It covers all sorts of people in every corner of our state. It's a very important piece of our health coverage system. It is important to know for understanding the public health emergency that Medicaid is a program that is funded both by the federal government and the state government. So every dollar that Florida spends on Medicaid is matched by a little more than $1.50 in funds from the federal government. And during COVID-19, the state is actually getting a little bump in that money. And that's going to be important as we talk about the public health emergency. So next slide, Abraham. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the public health emergency and the protections that it provided for Medicaid. So we all remember March of 2020 all too well, the month that felt like 15 years. And when COVID began, one of the very first things that happened was the United States Congress passed a whole bunch of bills, putting all kinds of money out into pumping all kinds of money out into the states to address all of the various aspects of the pandemic. And one of those bills was called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And one of the important things that bill did was it said that when states accept this extra Medicaid money that we're offering them, because we recognize that it is a pandemic and Medicaid is a critical part of our healthcare system. And so we're going to give extra money, like we mentioned before, to the states while we are in this public health emergency. But hey, states, if you're taking this money from us, you have to follow a few rules. And one of those are you can't have any new eligibility requirements or make it any harder for people to get onto Medicaid. And you can't require any cost sharing for treatment or testing related to COVID-19. And most importantly, you cannot disenroll anyone who is on Medicaid for as long as we say that we are still in a public health emergency. And that public health emergency, it's an official term. It doesn't just mean as long as things are bad. It means the government says, the United States government says, a public health emergency has been declared, and they did that in March of 2020. And as of now, September 29th, 2022, that public health emergency is still ongoing. It has not been declared over yet by the federal government. So what that means is all those people who were covered by Medicaid as early as March of 2020 and who have joined the Medicaid program since then, 2020, 2021, 2022, no one can be disenrolled from the Medicaid program, even if they start making, lots of money and otherwise wouldn't qualify. They cannot be disenrolled unless they move out of the state or if they voluntarily say, I don't want Medicaid anymore. But they cannot be disenrolled otherwise until the public health emergency is declared over. Right now, the last thing that we've heard is that the public health emergency is definitely going to continue through So we know that we've got some time. Could go till March, could go till June. We don't know, but we know we've got till at least the beginning of 2023. Next slide. Thank you. So this is just to show how critical the Medicaid program has been during the public health emergency, during this COVID pandemic. As you remember, this hasn't just been a public health emergency, it's been an economic emergency. And when COVID first started, I'm sure none of us forget what it was like, that businesses were shutting down, services were shutting down, the tourism sector was shutting down, and people by the millions were losing jobs across the state and across the country. And what that meant was that people who previously hadn't been eligible for Medicaid suddenly were eligible for Medicaid because they had no income. And so we saw that the enrollment numbers in the Medicaid program have spiked in the last 2 years. And this graph is just actually through late October of last year. So it's already a year old. So I can tell you, and this, you'll see on this picture, it says over 1.2 million new people in Medicaid. So the Medicaid enrollment went up by 1.2 million. Now it's almost 1.7 million people have been added to the Medicaid program since the pandemic began. So we've got a whole lot more Florida residents who are relying on Medicaid for their health coverage. But the other thing we know is when it comes time that the public health emergency ends and the state is allowed once again to disenroll people, a lot of those people are no longer going to be eligible. So next slide, please, Abraham. Thank you. So we already went over this quickly, but just to repeat, who are the folks who are covered by Medicaid in Florida? It's predominantly low-income parents and caretaker relatives of children, the children themselves who are in low-income families, pregnant women, individuals who were formerly in foster care up to their 26th birthday, non-citizens who have medical emergencies get emergency Medicaid just to cover that emergency care, and then aged or disabled individuals who are not yet receiving SSI disability coverage. So we can go to the next slide and let's look at who of those folks are most likely to lose their coverage, because we know circumstances change, and Florida is one of the states with the most restrictive Medicaid eligibility criteria. So this slide is showing us who's most likely to lose coverage when the federal government says to the states, okay, the public health emergency is over, you're no longer required to keep everyone on your Medicaid program. So it's now going to be parents and caregivers who at the time that they enrolled in Medicaid that they did meet the income eligibility criteria, but now they've gone back to work or they've gotten a promotion or a second job. And so now their income is too high to meet the Medicaid eligibility criteria. So they're considered over income. Those folks are likely to lose coverage. We also know that you have your kids, if you're a low income parent, your kids have to be under age 18 in order to be covered. So if your kids are no longer under age 18, then those parents are no longer eligible. We've also got young people who turned 19 or 20 are likely to lose coverage because the income guidelines for 19 and 20-year-olds, though they are still considered children for purposes of being eligible to join the Medicaid program, the income guidelines for those folks are so low that very many people who were previously covered as part of a family are no longer going to be eligible when they're being evaluated on their own as a 19 or a 20-year-old. We also know that some people who were covered as a disabled individual or a senior who previously had not been part of the Supplemental Security Income Program, the SSI program, but have since been admitted to that program, they're now covered by Medicare, which means they're going to be kicked off of Medicaid. And we also know that that group that I mentioned of individuals who in the past were in foster care, those folks are only eligible till they turn 26. So if they are someone who was formerly in foster care and they've now turned 26 or 27, they're going to also lose access to their Medicaid coverage. So next slide, please. So let's kind of walk through one example, because I know that was all a lot of information and I don't want it to sound overly complicated, because it is complex, but it's also quite basic on the one level. So let's give an example looking specifically at parents or caregivers who are over income. So under normal Medicaid rules, the income limit for parents with minor children is very low. It's about 30% of the federal poverty level, which means that a single parent with 2 minor children is not eligible for coverage if his or her taxable income is above $582 a month. And you don't need to remember these numbers, you just need to hear the basic concepts. So we have a cutoff for a family with 2 kids. So let's take the example of Zoe. She's a single parent. She has 2 minor children. She lost her job in April of 2020 when everything shut down. And because she had no income at that point, she enrolled the entire family in Medicaid. Now, she got another job just three months later, let's say, summer of...
Can you slow down a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. Let's say she got another job just a few months later that summer. But because of the public health emergency rules about Medicaid, she and her whole family have remained covered by Medicaid for these last 2+ years. So even though under Florida's normal rules, with her new income, she would no longer be eligible, she's been able to stay on because of the public health emergency. Now, when the public health emergency ends, what's going to happen to parents whose income has increased over the eligibility limit? And I'm just giving this one example, but this same type of analysis is going to apply to all of those categories that we just looked at a minute ago. So the Department of Children and Families, which we all know as DCF, will determine if the parent is eligible for a different type of Medicaid. So when someone loses Medicaid eligibility under their current category of coverage, they may be eligible for another type of coverage. So for example, Zoe might still be eligible if she's become pregnant or if she's become disabled, because those types of coverage have higher income limits than coverage for low-income parents. So another thing to know is that when DCF does terminate the coverage of a current recipient because their income is over the coverage limit for their category, they will get a notice from DCF saying that they've been enrolled in what's called the medically needy program. And you may be familiar with that program. And essentially what that program says is the person now has to pay a share of cost of any services that they access. So Medicaid is saying, you're eligible because you fall into this category that we consider eligible, but you earn too much money. So now we're going to make you pay like a deductible in order to access services. So that's the medically needy program. So people may be put into the medically needy program. If they're not put into medically needy, they may be eligible for an Affordable Care Act plan. And I know we're going to be talking in a bit, we're going to be hearing from the Catalyst Miami folks about accessing the marketplace. And so everyone remembers Obamacare, also known as the Affordable Care Act. And as a result of that, that law, which passed at this point so many years ago, we have this private health insurance marketplace, and many folks are eligible to get subsidies to purchase insurance on that marketplace. So if you're no longer eligible for Medicaid, you may be eligible for an ACA plan. And for folks who fall into the coverage gap, that says JHS Care Card, which is Jackson Health System. So for all of us who live in Miami, we are very lucky to have the Jackson Health System as a source of accessible care for folks who don't otherwise have insurance. And Jackson has its Care Card, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with, which you can apply for. I'm not going to say the application process is easy, because it is not. It requires a whole lot of paperwork, and it can be a lot of hoops to jump through. But it does, when you get the card, give you access to very low cost care at Jackson. So let's skip the rest of the slide. We'll get to that in a minute and go to the next slide, please, Abraham. Thank you. So I'm not going to go into the details of this chart at all. It's just to show you, this is the income limits chart that's used to determine whether families, pregnant women, 19 and 20-year-olds, kids of different ages are eligible for Medicaid. So as you can see, it's a complicated chart, which is to say there may be room for error. And if you do get a notice, or if someone you know gets a notice from DCF saying, we find you're no longer eligible for the program, you may want to meet with a caseworker to ensure that that was a correct determination, both based on the different categories that your family now falls into, and to make sure that they got your income levels correct. So you should know that this chart exists out there, and there are people who are really good at reading it and can help you make sure that a DCF determination is correct.